Hello, everyone, and welcome to the April 2022 Legacies and Lunch, a program of CAL's Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. I'm Heather Register Zabindin, Outreach Coordinator for the Bobby L. Roberts Library of Arkansas History and Art. The Roberts Library houses the galleries and bookstore at Library Square, the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies, and the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. The Roberts Library Research Room is open Tuesday through Friday from 10 to 5. And join us every Saturday. Now we're open every Saturday from noon until 4. Our genealogists and historians are here waiting to help you. This talk is being live streamed to YouTube and will be available to view on the CAL's YouTube channel immediately following the program. The speaker will answer questions at the end of the session, so type your questions in the chat box on Zoom. And now for today's program. This month we have Angela Chandler to talk about geology of the Big and Little Rocks in Central Arkansas. Angela received her bachelor's from Arkansas Tech and her master's from the University of Arkansas. She has worked at the Arkansas Geological Survey for 24 years and was recently promoted to Assistant State Geologist. She has mapped 22 quadrants in the Ozarks and plans to continue mapping and producing trail and float guides for Arkansas state parks. This program is part of the tricentennial of La Petite Roche. These events are being put together by the city of Little Rock to celebrate the 300th anniversary of the naming of Little Rock. On April 9th, 1722, French explorer Harpe and his men were sailing up what we now know as the Arkansas River when they came across a rock outcropping that was just large enough to form a small harbor for their boats. The men named this place La Petite Roche, or the Little Rock. Visitors can see what remains of that first Little Rock at La Petite Roche Plaza in Riverfront Park in downtown Little Rock. Celebrations to mark the 300th anniversary of this naming will occur throughout the year, including this weekend on Saturday. So everyone, please give a warm virtual welcome to Angela.
Hello, and thank you so much for asking me to give this presentation. It has allowed me to do some research I probably otherwise would not have done, but it does involve rocks, which I love learning about. So let's go ahead and get started. And let me get this set up for you about the time historically that we're talking about. So we're looking, as Heather talked about, at the early 1700s. And mostly, those that knew about the river were the early Native Americans and very few explorers that came up the river. And so these early explorers like Harpe and Nuttall, they were depending on these Native Americans to tell them what they knew of the river. So they knew of the river only up to the rock, which we know as the Little Rock. And so, of course, you can see present day, the Little Rock here underneath the bridge there, very small exposure. And we'll talk more about that. But also pay attention to the dark color of the rock. We're going to discuss that with the descriptions there. And then also I mentioned I would talk about the French Rock, which that is actually Big Rock Quarry, which is just upstream of the Little Rock. Now, I usually hate word slides, but I did want to include some of this because it is very important with these early explorers coming up the river. Why were they doing this? And again, it's the early 1700s. They're opening up trade. So they're using our natural resources for trade. They want to look and see if there's any native materials such as ores or minerals, looking at the quality of these. And they're also recording a lot of information about the river. And, this may seem trivial, and we're all used to going down to the Arkansas River, looking at it now. We only know the river as it has been controlled, with our navigation system. But back in the 1700s, the river looked totally different. And, they were able to see rock outcrops along the river, which we rarely get to see now. And Harpe was, one of his goals was to, go up the Red River. He started off in the early 1700s going up the Red River, and then he switched to the Arkansas River. That was in, 1722. So he's coming in from Arkansas Post, and he's going upstream. So imagine that as well. No one would even try to go upstream on the Arkansas River today because of how deep it is and how much flow there is. But back in the early 1700s, of course, it was uncontrolled. It was not as deep as it is now. And they could see these rocks sticking out of the ground. So some of the first descriptions that we have from Harpe, if we look at this historical journal of the French in Louisiana that he wrote for us, and we can see his descriptions. He's found rocks sticking out of the ground. That was his reference to the Little Rock, the rock. And then he continued on upstream to where he saw a larger rock, which was the French Rock. That is now Big Rock Quarry. And he talks about Big Rock Quarry as steep hills. And he does have a few rock descriptions because he mentions, slate quarries. So we're going to talk about that more in depth too. Because again, this was the early 1700s. Geology was just developing as a science. So there wasn't as much known, especially in the United States, about the geology. And of course, I used a lot of the terminology from Harpe. He proceeded 90 leagues. So a league is approximately, 3.5 miles. So from Arkansas Post, that would have been around 310, 11 miles from Arkansas Post. I haven't checked that to see if that's the correct knowledge, but this is directly from his journey in this historical journal here from Arkansas Post. So let's look at this, river-wise, and this is a map showing you a digital elevation model. So we're looking at Arkansas Post, and we see the river. And so he's going upstream. And so what you're looking at here are different topography of the state, zooming in this area here from Arkansas Post to Little Rock. So you notice the physiographic provinces here, the topography, the hilly areas. So if you look over here at this kind of zigzag mountainous zone, that's the zigzag mountains around Hot Springs. So we have the core of the Ouachita Mountains on the northwest side. We have the Gulf Coastal Plain on the southeast side. So as you're looking up Arkansas Post, as you could imagine on the river, you're not seeing, much in the way of topography. You're not seeing many hills. You're not seeing many rock outcrops, right? And then as you notice, we get here into Little Rock, you can see this transition into now starting to see a little bit of the hilly areas that we have here. So on the left here, what I'm circling, that is Granite Mountain quarries there. And then you kind of have this natural division between the Gulf Coastal Plain and the Ouachita Mountains. So we're getting into this more mountainous area here. So what were they seeing along the Arkansas River from Arkansas Post? So very flat land, as you know, if you drive out there today. So they're seeing mostly sandbars, small hilly areas here, not any rocks to see, probably a lot of trees and plant material that they talk about in the journal, which if you're interested in that, definitely take a look at some of these historical journeys. But you're seeing sandbars, you're seeing, alluvial plains here, terrace deposits. And if we zoom in a little bit closer to the Little Rock area here, you can see much more detail. So the Gulf Coastal Plain, you see these Oxbow Lake regions here coming up from the Arkansas River, getting into this mountainous region. So this separation that we see here between the Gulf Coastal Plain and the Ouachita Mountains, or this highlands area, we call this the fall line. So you're falling off this higher terrain area into this lower Gulf Coastal Plain. So here you see is the location of the Little Rock. And of course, he saw that first rock outcropping there. And then as you head a little bit farther upstream on the river, then you can see this large area here, which was Big Rock, or as he calls it, the French Rock. And again, you see these linear hills here, which are the Ouachita Mountain region. And if you're used to looking at a topographic map, then this is a topographic map view of North Little Rock. So here's the Arkansas River here with Riverfront Park. The Little Rock would be around here. And then if you go upstream, this is the quarry area here noted on the map. This is Big Rock Mountain, Fort Roots. So these are the areas that we're going to be concentrating on here and talking about. So I'm going to show you a little bit of the rock. Now, this is the French Rock, or this is Big Rock Quarry. So this is a dated picture taken, many years ago, but it shows you the rock type. So we have sandstone here, mostly sandstone, and the geologic formation called the Jack Fort Formation. And so one of the references that we have here at the survey talking about the mineral resources is dated in the 1960s. And at this time, there was an abundance of sandstone being crushed and used in the state, the majority of it coming from Pulaski County and Big Rock Quarry. So there was actually a crushing and screening plant located here in this quarry where they were producing a variety of products, crushed stone for aggregate and riprap and road construction. And this is just another view showing you the high wall of Big Rock Quarry there, and you can see the river in the lower background there. So again, sandstone, a great resource, economically and, early on for trade, for building purposes, for a port. They were looking at these places to use, to get off the river and build a city. And that's what they did here. All right, so let's just take a minute to discuss our physiographic provinces. And so the state can be divided up into two different regions. I previously mentioned that we have our highlands or hard rock region there to the northwest, or we have our Gulf Coastal Plain to the southeast. So again, that black line is the fall line that separates the hard rock from our unconsolidated sediment like sand, silt, and river deposited sediment. So that's the basic two divisions that we have in the state. And then we can go on to divide those into physiographic provinces. Now, keep in mind, these are geologic provinces. So they're related to how these were formed geologically. So it's not related to, the plant life or the botany. This is strictly geologic provinces. So then we can divide these further on into these 5 regions or provinces based on the geology. So we have the Ozarks, the River Valley, the Ouachita Mountains, the West Gulf Coastal Plain and Mississippi River Alluvial Plain. But we're concentrating again on this area here. So the division between the Mississippi River Alluvial Plain and the West Gulf Coastal Plain really kind of follows the river here, the Arkansas River, and then it hits the hard rock here. So we're looking at this division right here between the Ouachita Mountains and the Gulf Coastal Plain and Mississippi River Alluvial Plain. So that's the area we're going to zoom in on and talk about. Now, from reading other early references, we can also get other perspectives about what was seen along the river. And one of La Harpe's lieutenants and engineers' name was Dumont, and he reports that there was an emerald rock somewhere on the Arkansas River. But then they didn't find this emerald rock. He says, they did not have the good fortune to discover it. But then he also mentions that there must be gold mines, right? Because we saw all of this gold dust in the waters. And of course, this is another reference that's from the pictorial history of Arkansas from early times. So, a lot of these early explorers were depending on these rumors or these descriptions from our Native Americans to look for these different ores or features. And if we fast forward to Thomas Nuttall's journal, in the early 1800s, he's still building on these previous rumors. He's looking for these different minerals too. And of course, he sees the Little Rock, right? He also comes up the river. He's traveling upstream. And these guys, it's remarkable. They were traveling upstream in these little pirogues, which are these small canoe-like, boats, and going upstream. Again, just to imagine that on the Arkansas River is truly amazing. And when you read some of Nuttall's journal, he talks about the river rising a couple of feet, and then how they couldn't get upstream in some places, when the river was so high. So it's very interesting to read and just think and imagine all that today, while it's so different. But Nuttall came up the river again. He's coming up from Arkansas Post as well. He's seeing all the sand, and all of a sudden he sees this prominent hill that he is called the Little Rock. So it's the first rock that they see along the river. And what's really interesting too is Thomas Nuttall was a botanist. He was a naturalist, so he was not a geologist. However, he must have read or learned enough that he could actually give a description to the rock that he saw there, to the Little Rock. And, it's amazing because, again, geology was in its early stages of being developed as a science, and a lot of that was being developed in Britain. And so, we didn't have a lot of description from the US yet, but Nuttall did describe this using a geologic term for the rock. And he did call it, this dark greenish rock. So maybe that's where our emerald rock term comes from. The things to notice here are the dark greenish color, the sandstone. They did use the term slate to refer to it. And, and he noticed that it was dipping. So this is his description. So to geologists, this is pretty fantastic coming, from someone who's not studying geology. Well, let's compare that to what we see on the ground, his description to what we see now. Well, here's that dark color. We see that, that greenish color. So it is, a hard rock that we have here in the Ouachita Mountains. We do have sandstone. We do have some shell. But you're seeing where he gets maybe that emerald rock term from the Harpe. And of course, the description that Nuttall gives us is pretty spot on, and he calls it a gray wacky, which, that's kind of an older term to geologists. But the thing to take away from this is not necessarily reading the slide or description, but noting that, he was really observing the rocks. And from a geologist's point of view, that's our science. You observe it, you tell what color it is, you tell what it's made up of, sandstone, and here he was as a naturalist doing that. So it is a sandstone. So here's that rock just from another view. So the lighter brown color here is sandstone, and this darker black is shell. So it's, we would refer to it as a slaty shell and not just a pure slate. That's a metamorphic rock. So these are sedimentary rocks. The majority of Arkansas is covered by sedimentary rocks. But also just keep in mind that, like all explorers, he's trying to find all of these minerals or ores based on these previous findings or rumors, if you are so inclined to call them. And, when Nuttall came through, he had actually heard reports of there being silver in the area. So he comes into the area around, between Little Rock and the Big Rock, and he's looking for silver, but he never finds any silver. He sees, pyrite and different minerals like that. And so, he's like, hey, we've been duped. And of course, they didn't talk that way back in the early 1800s. So this was his quote, that, he undertook this whole exploration, hoping that he was going to find these minerals, and no, he didn't see them. But he's a naturalist. He's looking for other things. So what was it that these guys were seeing? What made them believe that they had silver? What made them believe that they had gold? Well, we did have minerals native to this region here around Little Rock and Big Rock quarries. You know, we do have galena in the area. So this is a sample of galena. It's the ore of lead. It's very heavy for its size and, you know, very distinctive look. It has a silver color. And so naturally, you know, maybe they thought there was silver associated with it. And actually there, you know, it came to be that there actually was a little bit of silver associated with it. Later on, we came to learn that. But the most abundant mineral that we have in the Ouachitas is our state mineral, which is quartz. So there's a beautiful quartz cluster there. And of course, quartz was abundant in the veins in the rock. So they also saw, you know, veining in the rocks and saw these different minerals. And so maybe what they were seeing that made them think that there was actually gold in the area could have been pyrite. So, you know, this is a sample of pyrite. You can see this reflection that's giving you this gold color. And they could have seen small pieces of this and thought, hey, you know, this is gold. But this really isn't gold. This is pyrite, or, you know, informally, commonly called fool's gold. Now, one other thing that I want to bring out that will help us with the geology of the area, and you're seeing this slide again, because I wanted to note the dip of the rock that Nuttall described here. So he says 45 degrees. So this is something in geology that we do as a field geologist. You know, is the rock flat lying? Is the rock dipping or inclined away from horizontal? You know, and it's very intuitive, and that Nuttall would describe this, right? And so sure enough, of course the rock is dipping here. It is not flat lying. You know, maybe many of you have driven in the Ozarks and you've seen the flat lying rock there. And if you've driven, you know, across the river and you've noticed the rock crop on the south side of the river, you will see that it is not flat lying, it is dipping. And so if the rock is not flat lying, you know, it has been subjected to some sort of event to cause it to be dipping. And of course, that has been the case here in the Ouachita Mountains. So we had this mountain building event where we had the continents colliding. Again, this is plate tectonics. So we had, you know, the North American continent was colliding with the South American continent and the African continent. And it was pushing up all of these rocks toward the surface and creating the Ouachita Mountains. And so at one time, back in geologic time, all of the rocks that are now that you see at the surface in the Ouachita Mountains were actually in a deep ocean basin. So they were originally deposited as flat lying. This is before we had the mountain building event. And then once we had that mountain building event, it pushed all of those rocks that were in the basin northward, and it's created a buckle in the rocks, or a flexure. So that upper diagram that you see here is kind of the start of that buckle. And as this compression increased, then these folds got tighter and tighter, and eventually the rock broke. And these black lines that you have here, these are faults. The rock broke and slid past different zones here. And so now the lower diagram shows you what the Ouachita Mountains looks like now, and how the rocks are contorted and folded and buckled, which is different than the rocks that we see in the Ozarks and in the river valley. And don't be scared of this map here. This is a zoomed in section of a geologic map showing you the area that we've been looking at here. So this is the Arkansas River here. Of course, you can see North Little Rock. This is that Granite Mountain complex here. So all of the yellow color, that's our sediment. That's our sand, silt that's been deposited by the Arkansas River. And this colorful area here, that's our highland area, the Ouachita Mountain region here. And each color, gives you a geologic formation. So our color coded, according to the rock type. And then, of course, it has a label. It tells you the age, whether it's M for Mississippian, Ordovician. And, you see, it looks very complicated. You see all of these red lines on the map here. All of those red lines are faults. But, don't be scared. You don't have to interpret any of this. The point of this is just to show you that, here we are coming in from this kind of simple yellowish sediment that we have deposited in the Gulf Coastal Plain. And then once you hit this Ouachita Mountain region here, the rocks are messed up. They're messed up because of this mountain building event. But that mountain building event also gave us a lot of the minerals that we have today and the rocks. And so these were resources that were used from early on to present day, just like we use the resources in Big Rock Quarry. So here's Big Rock right here. This was the French rock from the Little Rock. They were looking for these resources, and those were the reasons they were, coming up the river originally for trade. And those were part of our resources used for trade as well. So that's all I have for you today. You're welcome to email or call if you have any questions. And we welcome anyone sending in rocks or minerals for identification. And I appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was fascinating. Oh, my chat box disappeared. Let me get that back open, because we do have some questions. There it is. Okay, so everybody start typing your questions in the chat. We did have one person put a question in the chat ahead of time, which I love to see. So Roy would like to know, were there any native villages or towns in the area of the two rocks at the time La Harpe arrived? And if so, what tribes were represented here?
Okay, so for that information, you will probably need to go back and read La Harpe's journal, which is available online. You can download that because it's so old, or you could ask, your local archaeologist. So, I'm a geologist, and so I'm really only concerned with the geology and just did enough research to be dangerous for this presentation. So I really can't answer that question about the native tribes, but from reading Nuttall's journeys and La Harpe's, yes, there were many different tribes that were living along the Arkansas River. And it's very interesting to read about that. So I would encourage you to do that.
And while you're answering the next question, I'm going to Google La Harpe's journal, and I'll put the link in the chat so that people can look at that. The next question is from Corbin, and he would like to know, I assume it's a he, they would like to know what makes these sandstones green in comparison to the sandstones out at Pinnacle Mountain.
Well, that's a good question, Corbin. You might want to answer that question, because I think Corbin's with our agency.
Don't you love it when your coworkers come onto your talk? So the next question is from Susan, and she asks, are these Ouachita Mountain fault lines active like the New Madrid fault?
Oh, sure. No, generally these faults are not active. So these faults happened back in geologic time, around 300 million years ago. So they currently are not active.
Okay. Let's see. Whoops, the chat jumped a little bit. So Corbin made a smiley face. Another comment, I think it said there were shale quarries near Big Rock, just making an assumption. What do you think that was being used for?
Well, it was crushed up and used as, road material as well, and, finer material for the road.
And then David Paul would like to know, was Little Rock a glacial deposit, and then from long before the Ouachitas?
No, glaciers, only came down as far as northern Missouri. So they didn't make it down to Arkansas.
Okay. I am typing. I found one journal of La Harpe's at the Library of Congress, which has been scanned. So here is that link for folks. So we were joking. I was joking, I guess, before this talk came live about the fact that the railroad bridge kind of sits on top of the Little Rock, and so I think people don't realize that picture you had of kind of underneath the bridge. Most of us don't go out, or I've never actually been out boating on the Arkansas River. I've lived here all my life, but you don't really see the formation that's under. I think most of us look at it from Riverfront Park and don't realize that that's down underneath there. And so that was for me, that was a really cool photo, to be able to see, what it looks like from, I guess, the shoreline.
Well, we weren't floating. We just walked down from above, to that. So, physically you can do that. You can walk right there to it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. Well, hopefully people will get to do that this weekend or later in the year when the weather gets nice. It's a little cloudy today, but yeah, I mean, you hear about, the fact that the railroad kind of blasted away a large portion of the rock. Do we know how big the rock was before that happened?
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know that. I've asked several people and nobody seems to know. So
right, and you just mentioned I mentioned we walked down there, but that has been several years ago. So I don't know, after they built that elevator, I haven't actually tried to walk down to it since then.
Okay.
So I'm not real sure if you really can access it anymore.
So nobody quote us on that. You may not be able to access it, and that's okay.
Yeah, check it.
So David Paul has another question. Are there any drawings of what the Little Rock really looked like? And I'm guessing no, if we don't know exactly what size it was.
Yeah, I haven't found any yet. And I know we used to have some historical newspaper documents, but I haven't really researched this, exhaustively to figure out what is out there.
Yeah.
So if someone was really interested, they would just have to do that. They just have to look at any kind of, historical newspaper documents or anything like that to see. In Nuttall's journals, he has some drawings of Pinnacle Mountain and other, mountainous areas and rocks, but he didn't have any drawings for the Little Rock or the Big Rock.
Well, and one of the things that you and I were talking, you talked about it a little bit in your talk, but we were talking before about, the fact that for most of us, the way the river looks now is not the way, obviously, it would have looked like when the Harpe came through, and maybe not even when our, my grandparents were alive. They've been dead for 30 years now, but because of the navigation, because of what has happened, because of what we as humans have done to the river, making it navigable to Tulsa, we have changed it a lot. And so, being able to see what it looked like when La Harpe's time is not possible. So yeah, I wish there were drawings.
Right.
I wish they had better documented.
Yes.
So Denver Peacock, who is, I think, the mastermind behind this tricentennial celebration, puts in the comment, he thanks you for the talk. It says it's a great presentation. He hopes that everybody can join us Saturday for a free family fair, community concert, and fireworks at the Riverfront Park. Lots of other events are going on as well to kick off the tricentennial year anniversary. You can find more information at littlerock.com/300 or follow La Petite Roche Tricentennial on Facebook. So there is all the information that you need to know about all these events. And I think I saw on the news that this weekend, the Consul General from French Consul General is going to be here for the program, or maybe that was actually earlier in the week. But
wow.
Yeah, no, that was kind of cool. So David Paul has asks, was there a river crossing at Little Rock for the Santa Fe Trail or other trails south?
I don't know about that.
I don't either. I used to work at the old State House, and I know that there was some kind of ferry system. I mean, not by what we think of as a ferry system, more like a raft that went across. Right. But yeah, I don't know of any. I mean, they had to cross the river some way. The Southwest Trail, you had to get across at some point. And I think, and y'all don't quote me on this, but I think that there were times where, especially at the lower part of the river, down towards where it becomes part of the Mississippi, it gets really almost, I mean, I don't know that you could walk across it, but it was very shallow during certain parts of the year until we made it navigable. So, right. Yeah. But that would be a question for someone from the Corps of Engineers, and yeah. they're not here today. So, well, thank you so much for doing this program for us and helping us celebrate the naming of the Little Rock and La Harpe's journey. I really appreciate it. I can't express that enough. So next month, we will have Buck Foster talk about John Wesley Woodward, the founder of the first school for the deaf in Arkansas, which I think was in Clarksville. Sorry. Oh my gosh. I've always told people not to get those confused, and I just did it. So it's in Clarksville. And so mark your calendar for Wednesday, May 4th at noon, and join us back here on Zoom. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, Angela, for a great program, and we'll see everybody next month.